Well, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has, as you know, indicated that he'll ask us in a referendum for the power to alter the Constitution. The question being, do you support an alteration of the Constitution that establishes an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, unquote? When there was an immediate outcry about the absence of detail, Anthony Albanese revealed 3 clauses to be written into the Constitution, one of which says, quote, the Parliament shall, subject to the Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to the composition, functions, powers and procedures of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, unquote. You will remember I indicated to you last Thursday that that clause alone, I said, must end any likelihood that we should vote yes. Future Australian parliaments, in other words, could give this Indigenous parliament, quote, functions and, quote unquote, powers. Functions and powers. We're entitled to ask what functions, what powers. The former Prime Minister Tony Abbott has one of the finest minds of anyone to have entered Parliament since the war. He writes with clarity and conviction. Last week he wrote, and I quote, the problem with entrenching in the Constitution an Indigenous voice to the Parliament is not just that it makes race an element in who can vote and who can stand for election, but also that it unavoidably changes the way our government works, because a particular group will have an unspecified say over unspecified topics with unspecified ramifications, unquote. This led to the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd launching an attack on Tony Abbott, arguing that he's stoking anxiety and fear. Pretty pathetic defence, I would have thought. Anyway, Tony Abbott joins us tonight, the former Prime Minister. Tony, thank you for your time. In the piece by Kevin Rudd, which I must apologise for having read, I normally try to avoid him, he makes reference to the apology that he delivered in 2008 to Indigenous Australians. May I just ask you, how has that apology benefited Aboriginal Australians who, as Jacinta Price has said over and over again, continue to suffer in some parts of Australia, the most appalling and savage abuse from other Indigenous people?
That's a good question, Alan. And while I certainly thought that the apology was a bit of a grace note in our national life at the time, it's like lots of apologies. People feel better, but in the end, is their behaviour going to change? And the difficulty that we've got in this country is that for a long time now, too many Indigenous people have led worse lives than the rest of us, because in large parts of Indigenous Australia, the kids don't go to school, the adults don't go to work, and the ordinary law of the land doesn't apply. And until those things change, too many Aboriginal people will die much too young, and they will have lives that aren't nearly as fulfilling and satisfying as they should be. Absolutely. And the trouble with this voice, quite apart from the fact that it does entrench race in our Constitution, is that it's much more likely to be dominated, should it ever happen, by the likes of Lidia Thorpe than by people such as Jacinta Price, who know what it's like to live in a difficult, remote community and want to do the right thing by Aboriginal people, rather than simply engage in virtue signalling.